Thanks, John. Hello, everyone. Like John said, welcome to the NSP Closeout Program Income Office Hours session. My name is Taylor Edwards. I am a technical assistance provider with ICF. Today, we will allot 60 minutes during this office hours solely to your questions. And we will have we will have Oni eBay, Les Warner, along with Jamie Abbott. They're all TA providers. They're all my colleagues from ICF. But we'll also have Duncan Yetman from HUD on the line to answer any questions that you may have. Um, Kind of the function of this session, just to get everybody oriented before we jump right in. We received a lot of questions on the webinar on Tuesday. So we'll start by addressing and answering some of those leftover questions we may not have addressed on Tuesday. So we'll go through those. But as you start having your own questions, additional questions, if you still haven't heard, the answer that you're looking for, go ahead and drop your questions in the Q&A box that John just walked us through. As those come along, we will make sure to answer them following us covering those session questions from Tuesday. So we're answering session questions. We're also answering new questions. Just keep them coming in the Q&A box, and our lovely, presenters will be able to answer your question. So with that being said, I will pass it to Jamie to get us started on our questions today.
Thank you so much, Taylor, for that introduction to today's office hours on program income. If you don't have questions specifically to program income, but it is to the Neighborhood Stabilization Program, please go ahead and submit those questions today as well. So first off, we're going to start with the question about program income being under $25,000 per year. Is this per calendar year? Les or Anya, would you like to take that question?
I think this is something that we mentioned yesterday, that this is by program year. And one of the things that I kind of cautioned on is that, you might be partway through the year and looking at what had come in so far and be thinking, well, we don't really have to worry about program income because this is all below the $25,000 threshold. Just keep in mind that you could get an amount right at the end of your program year and put you well over that amount. So it's, I think, caution until you have completed that time period where you're going to be making that calculation. And I will say some grantees have with regular CDBG, and I think this would also apply with NSP, have chosen to say, let's just count everything as program income because we want to keep this funding committed towards furthering the goals of the program. I mean, I think there are some administrative choices you could make on that, but it is the program year that we're calculating here.
Les, thanks for that that information. That is very helpful. Okay, so on to the next question. Can program income be transferred to CDBG DR? And there was another question that inquired about transferring to the home program. So let's just go ahead and combine those together.
So I'll take this one. No, the closeout procedures specifically state that if you were to transfer program income, you would do so directly to the state's CDBG program. So not CDBG DR, not home. You want to make sure that when you're transferring that program income to CDBG CDBG, that you're going to use that program income for CDBG eligible activities. And also remember that when that transfer does happen, all the requirements that come with CDBG are going to be applicable to that program income.
And I'll just add, I think it's important to remember that CDBG is a really flexible source of funding. And so, as Sonia mentioned, it has to be used for another eligible CDBG activity. Well, that would include the types of things you might be doing with your disaster program or your home program. So you certainly may be able to utilize those funds in support of that need that you had identified in those other programs, but it needs to be done. This is going to be CDBG program income, and you're going to need to recognize it in that way and follow those requirements.
Great information. So on to the next question.
Sorry, Jamie.
Yeah.
Could we ask a follow-up to the question about the program year, because it's related?
Oh yeah, go ahead, Anya.
So I see in the Q&A, Deidre asked, they inherited NSP program from previous staff. How do we determine what is our program year? Duncan went ahead and answered that question and said, please reference the original NSP grant agreement. I just want to make sure we call that out because it's pertaining to that first question, just so everyone sees it. Thanks.
Perfect, Anya. Thank you for circling back on that. Okay, so the next question, what if we are a state CDBG program and not a CDBG entitlement? Can one transfer program income in a similar way?
Yeah.
Jamie, I'm not sure what's meant by we
transfer
transfer in a similar way.
Yeah.
I can handle this one, Jamie. This is Duncan Yetman with HUD. The transfer, if in a similar way, the person asking the question is asking, is the process the same? Yes, it is. In terms of transferring program income to your annual formula CDBG program, yes, it's similar. You would follow the same steps as an entitlement does in the state program. You would need to, make sure that any, reversion of assets from your subrecipient UGLUGs, that program income came back to you, to close out the program as well.
Thank you, Duncan. Okay, so once NSP program income is transferred to CDBG, are funds limited to NSP activities and restrictions, or are they applicable to all CDBG activities and regulations? Les, would you like to take that?
Sure. So the key thing here is that once you've transferred your NSP program income to CDBG, it essentially loses its identity as being NSP funding, and it is now CDBG, and so needs to follow the CDBG rules. So, as I mentioned, there's a lot of flexibility under CDBG and the types of eligible activities and national objective, but the NSP specific flexibilities that you had under that program of going, higher income, that's lost. So it is no longer NSP, and you need to turn to, okay, it's now CDBG funding. What are the rules for CDBG, and make sure that you are following all of those requirements.
Thank you, Les. Okay. On to the next question here. I'm going to pull a question from the Q&A box from Miss Howell, or from Alicia Howell. If you have program income at closeout and can't find eligible projects after several years, what becomes of the program income? Would you be able to transfer it still to CDBG?
So Jamie, it seems what Alicia is asking here is that they can't transfer to CDBG because this is a nonprofit that's asking that, that they don't have an annual formula grant to transfer it to. I think that's a situation that you have to kind of discuss with your CPD representative, because a lot of it depends on, I mean, the use of PI has to meet a NSP program requirement. If you can't find eligible projects for use of that PI, that is a problem, especially since you can't transfer it to a CDBG program because you don't have a CDBG program. So I think the particulars of your situation, I think you need to discuss that with your CPD rep for resolving that. Yeah.
And the grantee may look at that and say, well, we have other eligible uses for that. So we do want this money to come back to us so that we can, apply that to meeting needs that we've identified.
Right. Which is why I think it requires kind of a more nuanced approach and having a discussion with your local field office.
And hopefully the written agreement also clarifies the ability to pull that money back.
Right. Yeah. That's something that would have to be reviewed in terms of addressing that.
Okay, great. Moving on to the next question. It states, I'm with a state grantee who has subgrantees. We allow the subgrantees to retain program income at the local level to be spent on NSP eligible uses. Assuming we have all of the line of credit funds obligated to subgrantees, if a subgrantee wishes to transfer their local PI to CDBG, would one subgrantee be able to do so?
So the answer to this question depends on the identity of the subgrantee. If the subgrantee is a UGLUG in the state program, they could transfer program income that they've earned from an activity to an ongoing CDBG grant that subgrant that they have with the state. If this entity is an entitlement, they are not allowed to do so. States, they need to discuss that desire with the state. The state needs to discuss that with HUD. We've had some discussions with various states about that issue. And so the states need to contact their field representative to move forward on potential for doing that. That basically is how that would be handled.
Thank you, Duncan, for that information.
Sure.
Okay. So a question came in, Les and Onye, about the presentation about saying, you know, does all of the program income need to be spent before closeout?
Does all the program income need to be spent before closeout? So that'd be nice, I think, but no, the presentation was to show that there's different options and different strategies, and to really walk through and discuss that every one of the grantees are going to be dealing with a different situation. We presented 4 pathways that could be an option, but as you know, Duncan mentioned earlier, maybe none of those 4 work, and it may require having a conversation with your local field office to figure out what's the best path forward for you specifically. One of those strategies was to try to draw up program income before closeout, and it may require some logistics of how do we manage our existing programs and NSP activities. Do we need to do additional outreach, or think about our program design to, you know, make sure that we have costs that we can apply that program income to. So it's just one of 4 methods, but it's not a mandatory to do that.
Thank you, Onye.
Yeah, I would add that, you know, for grantees that do have program income that they're planning to spend post-closeout, they have up to 3 years after closeout to meet their LH25 requirement, if they have yet to meet it, and the plan is to meet it with that program income. Yeah.
I think that's a really important point on kind of planning and thinking about, okay, if I have not yet met that, I need to be really strategic on how I then utilize these remaining program income funds to make sure that I'm going to be in compliance.
Thank you. Now we're going to go to a question that we were unable to address during our Tuesday webinar. And that question was referring to the boxes from the presentation, talking about program income under 25,000, program income 25,000 to 250, and then anything over $250,000. So the question was related to, for program income over $25,000, can any of that portion be used for general administration? Onye or Les, who wants
Well,
to
I
take
can
that?
get us started, and then others may want to add to that. So for funding that is, if you're moving your NSP program income to CDBG, you are able to, when you calculate the amount of admin you're able to use under CDBG, it's looking at 10% of your overall allocation, but also then 10% of receipted program income. So it does, you know, if you add another $1 million of program income into your CDBG account, you would be able to then use 10% of that for covering administrative costs, recognizing that when you are then going to use these funds for an eligible CDBG activity, that you've got some administrative functions that are going to relate to that reuse of those funds. And so that's why that's in place.
So if you're going to keep the program income with the NSP program, let's go from that angle as well. I'm assuming the 10% would still apply, as that was part of the regulations as well.
Sure. Yeah, yeah, this is Duncan. That's correct. Mm-hmm.
Great, thank you. All right, so here's another question that we were unable to get to, is once the program income transfers to CDBG, are funds available for admin and public services? So this is kind of I guess an add-on to the first question is, you know, would the funds be available for the public services, which includes a cap?
So Jamie, I can pop in on this one if you'd like. So when you look at the public service cap, the 15%, except for a few exception communities, the way that's calculated is based on your allocation, plus it also includes distributed program income. So if you had, I don't know, going to try to keep numbers simple, but if you had $500,000 that you were utilizing for out of your allocation for public service activities, and you also utilized another, I don't know, $200,000 of program income, we would look at the total expenditure distribution of CDBG funds, and then making sure that those activities that were public service activities did not exceed 15% of that. So it does boost what you can actually utilize for public service activities, but it's based on that distribution of funds. So just transferring the money into program income, but not actually doing anything with it would not boost that. So for instance, if you were to transfer it and maybe create a revolving loan fund for some specific use and those funds were not being distributed, it would not boost the total that you could use for public service activities.
Great. Thank you. I mean, and that was a really good question regarding the caps. And so thank you for covering that. Okay. All right, for all of those on today's session, please remember to add your Q&A questions. Well, please add your questions to the Q&A box so we can address any lingering questions that you may have about program income or even just to the closeout process in general. Okay, so with that, I'm going to go ahead and I want to circle back to the LH25 requirement for program income. At what point does the LH25 requirement apply with the program income funds on hand? Les or Anya, do you want to take that?
I think this might be a good Anya question or a Duncan one.
Sorry, Jamie, repeat that again.
So when grantees have program income, at what threshold does the LH25, the 25% set aside requirement, at what point does that become enacted?
The 2014 closeout guide, which is what I've been referring to, says that any income that exceeds 250K per year per program year, that's what triggers meeting the 25% set aside requirement.
Okay, and then that 25% set aside requirement, just as a reminder for everyone, is the amount of the grantee's allocation that must, or program income in this example, must have been expended to house individuals or families whose income do not exceed the 50% area median income. Okay. All right.
I do see a question. Oh, sorry.
Oh, great.
Les, did you have
I was
something?
just going to say that this kind of ties back to what I was mentioning earlier about being aware of where you were in conjunction with that 25% set aside, and then making sure that as you are committing NSP program income to projects, that those are going to move you towards or keep you in compliance with that. You know, if you kind of forget about that and fund a whole number of projects that are not contributing towards that 25% set aside, you could then find yourself out of compliance because of these new projects you're committing to. So it needs to be part of your thought process in you know, the types of projects that you're targeting and award decisions.
Thank you, Les. And Onye, I see that several more questions have come in to the Q&A box.
Yep.
So the next one, is there a HUD deadline on when NSP funds have to be spent and closeout completed? And Duncan, you had responded, no, there's not a hard and fast deadline, but we are encouraging grantees to close out when they're ready. HUD may at some future date involuntarily close out grants.
Right, right. And Jamie, I just wanted to add to that answer. There is a provision that HUD has stated in both the 2016 and the 2019 closeout notices whereby we mentioned that prerogative, if you will, to involuntarily close out grants. HUD has not taken that action at this point with regard to NSP, but we may do so in the future.
I'll just add, as a former program administrator, I mean, I think the longer this goes on and the more distance from some of your projects, I think it'll make it more difficult. We have a lot of folks participating now that were not part of the initial funding on this program. And so I just think it will be helpful to folks to complete this, get it closed out, and kind of take that off of your to-do list. And that will probably only get more complicated when you're kind of going back and looking at past things to ensure that you know, everything's met a national objective. If there's anything that needs to be corrected to meet that, the longer that goes on, probably the harder it is to be able to address that. So, I mean, there may not be a hard and fast deadline, but I think it would be to folks' benefit to be able to try to have this on your as a goal to get it closed out.
Thanks, Les. On to the next question. If you subgrant funds to Habitat, assuming Habitat for Humanity, and they are servicing the loan when the grantee closes out, will we still have to report their program income?
I'll start this, but I think the issue here is how your agreements are listed. Program income is usually defined as money that's coming back to the grantee or subrecipient. So depending on how Habitat is recognized will, I think, determine whether this is simply loan proceeds that are staying with Habitat, or it's recognized as being program income and needs to follow these requirements. So I think that's the first thing to solve on this.
And then in general, Les, you know, maybe we need to cover like post closeout requirements as well as part of the NSP notice or the.
Yeah, I mean, I think we can reference folks to some of the NSP policy alerts that have been issued with regard to how to treat subgrantees as a contractor, a developer, a subrecipient. In this particular case, Habitat for Humanity is typically regarded as a developer. Therefore, they do not earn program income.
And I think one thing that was kind of messy in CDBG itself, which NSP is a derivative of, doesn't really have the category of developer, and so at least early on, a lot of the agreements were set up using subrecipient language and identifying NSP, what probably could have been treated as a developer had agreements that identified them as subrecipients. And so I think that's kind of part of the messiness on trying to determine how was this actually set up and what rule would apply.
Yeah, developers in CDBG and in NSP are direct beneficiaries of the program. Yeah, there's no program income that they're receiving.
And Duncan, could they, if they find that when the funding agreement was set up, that they tagged them as being a subrecipient when they could have made them a developer, is that something that could be changed, or what's your advice on that?
Subrecipient agreements are always open to amendment. It depends on the cooperation of the parties, involved, and most, well, I will say, the best subrecipient agreements have an amendment clause. They have provisions within them for how to change and amend the agreement over time. So, yeah, there should be a means for them to do that, should they want to change that agreement. Yeah.
Great. And that, I mean, that would certainly be to the benefit of Habitat at that point to have that change done. Okay.
Right.
Okay, great. Okay, if we have NSP 1 and NSP 3 after closeout, will the annual reports be due for both, or are they combined? And then also for closeout, does NSP 1 and NSP 3 program income need to be kept separate?
Okay, so this is asking several different questions here.
Yeah, two-part.
Yeah. Let me first talk to the program income issue first, the second part here. Program income does need to be associated with the activity that generated it. So if it was an NSP1 activity, then that's the activity that needs to be associated with that program income. So it does need to be tracked. It doesn't need to be accounted for separately. But with regard to annual reports, if you close out your NSP1 and NSP3 grant together at the same time, your annual reporting will be simplified. And but within the system, within DRGR, you're basically copying and pasting your annual reporting from the one grant to the other grant as well, because both grants will still show up in DRGR, and you'll need to just make sure that you're doing annual reporting for both grants. We don't have the ability to actually combine these grants into one grant. You're still going to have the separate grants. You can do closeout for both together. And it can be one closeout agreement covering both grants, but each grants are going to be separate for reporting purposes annually after closeout.
Okay. It appears that we have addressed the questions in the Q&A box at this moment. I do have a clarifying response out to Miss Beverly Arbor regarding the habitat.
Yeah. Yeah, Habitat's, I would say Habitat's loan proceeds, you know, the repayments on loans that they've made, if they were regarded by the grantee as a developer, those loan proceeds are not considered program income. They are Habitat's, to do what they will with, you know.
Oh, and that's okay, and that makes it a totally, not totally, but it makes it a bit of a different situation.
They need to meet with the properties that have been developed in NSP. Those properties still need to meet the affordability requirements for the terms that they've agreed to, whatever those may be. I mean, we have a safe harbor through our home program as to what those affordability requirements are with regard to the term of those with regard to NSP, but yeah, any loan proceeds would be their revenues and not considered program income.
Yeah, and talking about the affordability, there's still some reporting requirements surrounded that as well after post closeout.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so that would have to be reported on annually. So there would still need some interaction with your subgrantees on that information. Okay. Let's see. Okay, so circling back to program income and administration. Okay, so Carol missed our conversation on it. So just circling back and covering that NSP administration funds, the portion over $25,000, what amount is for administration? And if we make less than $25,000, is all of that available for administration? And there is a good question out of that. So anything over $25,000, the 10% threshold would be applicable. But for the $25,000 or under, Duncan, can all of that be assigned to NSP administration?
It's available for anything the grantee wants to use it for. Yeah, anything less than 25,000 is not considered program income. Yeah.
And Duncan, I'm assuming that the same breakout of thresholds between entitlement and state would also apply here.
So what we did have with regard to the state program in that slide in particular was to note that the threshold for NSP program income is 25,000. We do not adopt the state CDBG threshold of 35,000 for an NSP. It remains to be 20. It remains at 25,000.
Great, important to remember.
Yeah.
Okay. Just doing a time check here. We are in the middle of our office hours. We still have a good amount of time to answer any questions that grantees may have on the NSP program in regards to closing out or program income.
Yeah, I would encourage attendees, if there's an aspect to the answers to the questions that you've posed that you don't think have been fully addressed, by all means, um, uh, request to come off mute, and you can ask your question verbally. John can unmute you, and if that's easier for you.
Okay, and while just in this transition here, I do want to remind everyone that next week we have another webinar on land banks that on Tuesday, July 25th at 2 p.m. Eastern Time, a live webinar covering land banks and items to consider for closeout. And we'll also have another office hours on Thursday, July 27th, to answer any questions regarding the NSP closeout series.
And Jamie, we might want to also mention, I mean, we may have folks that have inherited an NSP program and are kind of feeling lost on this and being able to close out, that there is the ability to request technical assistance. And that might be for someone that really needs some help on figuring out how to kind of close things out, get things ready for closeout, that would also be an option for folks.
Yeah, and I see there's a follow-up question from Carol Pierce in the Q&A about working through closeout. Is a narrative required for each project? You need to demonstrate having met an NSP national objective and project eligibility. There's not a specific narrative required for each activity or project, but demonstration of having met a national objective, the accomplishment reporting that's reflected in your DRTR reports. That's what's necessary. I also want to follow up also on another question that I believe was posed on Tuesday with regard to the use of NSP program income once it is transferred into your CDBG program. The person who asked the question was sharing some angst, if you will, about having to do a substantial amendment for their CDBG program to account for this program income and its eventual expenditure for CDBG purposes. And the angst was expressed in such a way that they seemed to think that was a very long and laborious process. And if that's the case, I would ask that grantee in particular to look at how they handle substantial amendments within their CDBG program, and maybe even take a look at their citizen participation plan. They may want to determine whether they have some local requirements or some local additions that HUD necessarily doesn't require with regard to completing or executing a substantial amendment to their CDBG program. Substantial amendments really shouldn't be that onerous an activity within CDBG. There's a 30-day comment period. There's a necessary public participation piece of it in order to alert local residents and interested stakeholders about the available funds, the funds that are available for housing and community development purposes within your community. But really shouldn't be too onerous a process to do that, and to alert the public about that. It can be done. It can be done as part of your annual action plan. Each year, so you're kind of killing two birds with one stone, if you will. Yeah, I would ask the grantee to kind of look back at their own citizen participation plan and see if they haven't added some local requirements that aren't necessarily HUD related or federal requirements that are making that process so onerous at the local level. So just to throw that out there as something that HUD, the minimum requirements that HUD has, that's it. That's the minimum. You don't have to do a whole series of public hearings or other things that grantees sometimes add on to the process that aren't part of the federal requirements to do a substantial amendment.
That's some really good information there, Duncan. As being a previous grant administrator myself, I know there was always some types of angst whenever having to do amendments, and that information is very helpful.
Sure.
Okay. We have approximately 10 minutes left of today's office hours to cover any additional questions that still may be lingering for those in attendance. And we'll give it a few more minutes to see if we get any more questions submitted. And in talking about what Les had referenced, the request for technical assistance, I do want to stress that grantees do need to, prior to submitting the technical assistance request through the HUD Exchange website, grantees do need to work with their local CPD office to notify about wanting to make the request, as it might be something that the CPD office may be able to assist with, and or just being aware of the need for the request is beneficial as well. Okay. Taylor, if you don't mind, are you able to bring up the PowerPoint so we can go ahead and show the tools and resources that are available?
Real quick, Jamie, I think we have another question from Carol, but I'm not following it. I think she's asking about narrative for each project.
Yeah, and Duncan has verbally answered.
Okay, we're good on that.
Thank you for making sure I cover all the questions. Okay, so the tools and resources, there was a recent publication of a program income guidance tool. That guidance tool has a program income tracker along with a checklist that is very beneficial for grantees to review. It provides key considerations and decisions that would need to be addressed when dealing with the program income, whether it's keeping it or transferring over to the CDBG program. There's additional tools and resources available. The NSP Closeout Process and Guidance webpage through the HUD Exchange. This guidance document covers all aspects of the NSP program, including the 25% set-aside requirement, along with land banks, program income, obviously, quarterly performance reporting, especially if the grantees are missing any of their QPRs. And so there is guidance on how to catch up on QPRs as well. And then in addition, working within DRGR, or the Disaster Recovery Grant Reporting Database. Taylor has provided the link to, I believe, to the program income guidance document, which was discussed on a previous slide. Okay, additional tools and resources include the closeout instructions for the CDBG programs through the notice CPD 22-14, and the additional links for the previously mentioned the quarterly performance reports, the NSP closeout guide from 2014, which is still a relevant resource for closing out the program, along with the closeout status indicator report that is updated frequently, as well as the monthly financial update report. Here's information on requesting technical assistance for the NSP program. As previously mentioned, grantees will need to notify their CPD representative prior to making the request to make sure everyone is on the same page. And just a reminder, we do have the NSP closeout webinar next Tuesday, July 25th, along with the office hours on July 27th. Just doing a quick check here in the Q&A. There are no additional questions at this time, so I will go ahead and close out here to just let everyone know if you still have questions for NSP, you can contact your CPD representative. You may email us at nsp-questions@hud.gov, and/or you can attend next week's webinar trainings and live office hours where we can answer them, those burning questions for you. And with that, I will go ahead and close today's office hours. Thank you, everyone, for attending today's session, and look forward to seeing you all next week.